We have some breaking news just coming in. Iranian media has responded sharply to recent U.S. airstrikes. An Iranian state TV commentator stated that all American civilians and military personnel in the region are now considered legitimate targets. The anchor added, and I quote, "Mr. Trump, you started it, and we will finish it." The broadcast displayed a graphic highlighting U.S. bases across West Asia with a headline reading within Iran's fire range. The anchor further claimed the U.S. has no legitimate presence in the region. More updates are emerging from Iranian media, and we are joined by our correspondent Susan. Susan, earlier we were discussing Iran's repeated warnings that it would target U.S. interests if provoked. What are the latest details you can provide? Susan, we were examining Iran's capabilities, and it's important to note that key Iranian decision-makers have been eliminated by Israeli operations. Additionally, Israel seems to maintain air superiority over Iran. While Iran does have proxy forces, Hezbollah appears largely diminished and unable to offer significant defense. Especially over these past 9 days, we're seeing conflicting reports from Tehran. Some officials acknowledge that certain nuclear facilities sustained damage, but they claim key sites like Fordo remain largely intact. There's a gap between Iran's public statements and its actual capacity for retaliation. Once Iran assesses the full extent of the damage, its response may become clearer. Joining us now is Bishop Garrison, former senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense and current senior fellow at George Mason University Law School, live from Virginia. Thank you for being here. With the U.S. now actively involved in this Israel-Iran conflict, what are your initial thoughts on these military strikes? Bishop Garrison, thank you for having me. Moving forward, it's important to know what level of consultation occurred between the White House and Congress. There was no formal declaration of war against Iran, so any action taken must have been based on an imminent threat. The president needs to clearly explain this in tonight's address. The U.S. has been engaged in the region for 2 decades. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom myself, and Americans remain wary of further military involvement. The public deserves a full explanation as to why these strikes were deemed necessary now. Anchor. Susan also mentioned uncertainty over Iran's potential reaction, as their current military capabilities remain unclear. Iranian media is now declaring that all American targets are legitimate. What is your assessment of this? Bishop Garrison. These kinds of statements are not surprising under the circumstances. U.S. forces, allies, and assets in the region could very well be targeted. It's critical to understand what contingency plans are in place and whether the strike successfully minimized or neutralized. Iran's nuclear potential intelligence assessments had previously indicated Iran wasn't on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. The administration must clarify the rationale for taking this risk. Anchor. We're also monitoring the situation in the region. New York has issued alerts, and Israeli forces are on high alert. What sort of escalation do you foresee? Bishop Garrison. It's hard to say definitively since we lack a full picture of Iran's current capabilities. Complicating matters, this administration has downsized much of its diplomatic workforce, which limits options for de-escalation. We need to hear clearly from us leadership about plans to prevent further escalation. Anchor. President Trump has stated that now is the time for peace and is pursuing a diplomatic path. Given Iran's strong rhetoric so far, do you see any room for diplomacy? Bishop Garrison. There is always some possibility for diplomacy, but the chances are much slimmer now. Iran feels attacked by both Israeli and U.S. forces and has vowed to resist rather than surrender. Right now, prospects for negotiation appear limited. Anchor. Susan. We're also hearing Iranian officials saying they anticipated these attacks and evacuated key sites. Could you update us on domestic alerts as well? Susan. Yes, we've received reports that heightened alerts are in place around places of worship, government buildings, and diplomatic sites. There are also concerns about possible sleeper cells within the U.S., as mentioned by the FBI director. While these are precautionary measures, they reflect growing concerns about potential retaliation on American soil. Iranian officials are claiming that while there was some damage to sites, like Fordo, no irreparable harm was done. This contrasts with President Trump's statement suggesting significant damage. The true extent of the strike's effectiveness remains uncertain and will likely become clearer once the president addresses the PCAS nation at 10 p.m. tonight. The American public is seeking clarity on whether an imminent threat justified U.S. involvement. Anchor. Thank you. Susan, back to you. Bishop Garrison. U.S. involvement now seems to broaden this conflict beyond Iran and Israel. How do you assess the current risks to regional stability? Bishop Garrison. It certainly complicates the situation. The U.S. has military forces and bases throughout the region, including in Iraq. This raises the risk of further destabilization. Iran was likely tipped off after President Trump suggested a decision was coming within weeks, though the strikes occurred sooner. Iran likely repositioned assets in advance, and we can expect to see a mix of truth and propaganda as events unfold. Anchor. Russia has long supported Iran's nuclear program. How might this escalation impact relations with Russia and other nations? Bishop Garrison. It will likely worsen already strained relations with Russia, particularly given tensions over Ukraine. This could also affect how China and other adversaries perceive US actions in the region. Our allies, too, may question whether they were informed or consulted about this operation, particularly those nations working toward a diplomatic solution with Iran. Much remains uncertain at this stage. Anchor. Finally, do you think these strikes could pressure Iran into coming to the negotiating table? Bishop Garrison. It's difficult to predict. While diplomacy is never off the table, Iran may view these strikes as justification for resistance rather than negotiation. The greater concern is that sympathizers or lone actors might now be motivated to retaliate, which complicates the broader security landscape. Anchor. Susan. Democrats have voiced concerns that the president's actions risk entangling the US in another war. What are you hearing domestically? Susan. Recent polling shows most Americans oppose deeper US involvement in this conflict. There is bipartisan agreement that Iran should not develop nuclear weapons, but opinions differ on how to prevent that. Many lawmakers, including some Republicans, question whether President Trump's actions bypassed constitutional checks and risk escalating into a prolonged war. These debates reflect widespread public opposition to another extended US military engagement.